Her name was Margaret, 73 years old, retired librarian from Columbus, Ohio. Margaret had been on metformin for 12 years. 12 years of taking that little white pill every single morning. 12 years of watching her fasting blood sugar stubbornly refuse to move, and 12 years of sitting in her doctor's office hearing the same 4 words, "We need to adjust your dosage." Every 3 months, same story, same disappointing numbers, same look on her doctor's face. Her morning glucose hadn't dropped below 140 in over 2 years. She was tired all the time. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the deep, bone-level exhaustion that people with uncontrolled blood sugar know too well. Her feet tingled at night, her energy crashed by noon, and every morning, before she even had her coffee, she'd press that little lancet to her finger, watch the meter count down, and feel her stomach sink when the number appeared. Then she did something her doctor never suggested, never even mentioned. She added one drink, one simple drink made from 2 ingredients that cost less than $1 combined. She took it 30 minutes before bed every single night for 60 days. When she walked back into her doctor's office for her follow-up, he pulled up her fasting glucose log, scrolled through the numbers, and went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a routine appointment, a long, confused quiet. Then he looked up and said, and Margaret told me this herself, "These numbers don't make sense. What did you change?" Her fasting blood sugar had dropped an average of 31 points. Her morning readings, which hadn't started with a 1 in 2 years, were consistently in the 110s. She hadn't changed her diet. She hadn't started a new medication. She changed what happened while she slept. And that is exactly what I want to show you today. Because what Margaret stumbled onto wasn't luck, it was biology. Specifically, it was the one biological window that almost every piece of nutritional advice you've ever received has completely ignored. Before we go any further, if this kind of explanation, the actual mechanism, the real reason things work, is something you've been missing, hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a thumbs up. What I'm about to show you took me a long time to put together in a way that makes sense, and I want it to reach every senior who needs it. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Sarah Ellison. I've spent over a decade as a practicing physician, and in that time, I've watched something happen over and over again that genuinely frustrates me. I watch patients do everything right, eat better, walk more, take their medication on schedule, and still watch their blood sugar creep upward year after year. And when I dig into why, the answer almost always comes back to the same overlooked piece of the puzzle. It's not what they're eating between breakfast and dinner that's working against them. It's what their body is doing with sugar between 10 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning. That window, the overnight fast, is where metabolic health is quietly won or lost. And the vast majority of health advice out there, online, in doctors' offices, in every diabetes pamphlet you've ever been handed, it doesn't address that window at all. Today, I'm going to address it directly. I'm going to show you what your body is actually doing while you sleep, why that process so often goes wrong, and how a single drink made from 2 simple ingredients can measurably shift what happens inside you during those hours. This is not about a diet. This is about a mechanism. And once you understand the mechanism, Margaret's results stop looking like a miracle and start looking exactly like what they are: predictable biology. Let's start with what's actually happening inside your body while you sleep. Because this is the part that nobody talks about, and it's the part that matters most. When you finish your last meal of the day, your blood glucose rises. Your pancreas releases insulin, and your body begins the process of either storing or clearing that glucose. Under healthy conditions, your muscle tissue absorbs the bulk of it. Think of your muscles like a large sponge. The bigger and more metabolically active that sponge, the more glucose it can pull from your bloodstream before insulin even has to work very hard. But here's where it gets interesting. Once your muscles have absorbed their fill, once the sponge is saturated, your liver becomes the primary processor. And your liver, unlike muscle, has a much more problematic backup plan when glucose keeps arriving in excess. It converts that glucose into fat. Specifically, it converts it into triglycerides through a process called de novo lipogenesis. And I want to be very clear, this is not some minor side reaction. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation found that in individuals with elevated blood sugar, this process can account for a substantial portion of new liver fat accumulation, contributing directly to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, and the kind of chronic metabolic dysfunction that builds quietly for years before anyone notices. Now, here is the critical piece. Your liver does not behave the same way at night as it does during the day. Your liver runs on a circadian clock, a 24-hour biological rhythm governed by clock genes inside its own cells. During daylight hours, the liver is primed for active glucose processing. It's in work mode. But at night, it shifts into something different. It reduces active glucose uptake. It increases what's called hepatic glucose production. Essentially, it starts releasing stored glucose back into your bloodstream, and it shifts its focus towards cellular repair. This is completely normal. Your liver is supposed to do this. The problem is what happens when blood glucose and insulin are still elevated when you go to bed. Maybe your last meal was heavy in refined carbohydrates. Maybe you ate too close to bedtime. Whatever the reason, if your blood sugar is still high when your liver is trying to wind down its day shift and begin its night cycle, you are forcing it to continue metabolic processing at exactly the wrong time. And the result is inefficient glucose clearance, elevated fasting blood sugar in the morning, and over time, a progressive deepening of insulin resistance. This is what 12 years of dietary advice failed to address for Margaret. Changing what you eat without changing what happens in that overnight window is like fixing the roof of a house that has a flood running through the basement. You're addressing the visible problem and completely missing the one that's doing the real damage. The drink I'm going to describe to you works precisely on this overnight window, and the research behind it is far more substantial than most people realize. The drink is this: warm water, raw apple cider vinegar, and Ceylon cinnamon, taken 30 minutes before bed. That's it. No proprietary blend, no subscription, nothing that requires a trip to a specialty store. 2 ingredients that have been studied independently in peer-reviewed research for their effects on blood glucose, and that when combined, appear to work through complementary mechanisms that address the overnight window from 2 different angles simultaneously. Now, before I explain the science, I want to address the skepticism directly, because I'd have it too. Apple cider vinegar and cinnamon have been co-opted by the wellness industry for years. They've been attached to every imaginable health claim, repeated in every corner of the internet. And the result is that a lot of serious people have dismissed them entirely as pseudoscience. And honestly, that reaction makes sense when you look at how these ingredients are usually presented. People describe the outcomes without ever explaining the mechanism. And without the mechanism, it sounds like folklore. With the mechanism, it makes complete physiological sense. So let's go through it, ingredient by ingredient. The first ingredient is raw apple cider vinegar, and the compound that does the work here is acetic acid. When you consume diluted acetic acid, it's absorbed rapidly from your stomach and small intestine and carried directly to the liver. And inside liver cells, something remarkable happens at the molecular level. Acetic acid is converted to acetate, which then gets phosphorylated into acetyl-CoA. In doing so, it transiently shifts the ratio of AMP to ATP inside those liver cells. Now, that ratio shift might sound like chemistry jargon, but what it triggers is one of the most important enzymes in your entire metabolic system, an enzyme called AMP-activated protein kinase, or AMPK. If you've never heard of AMPK, here's how to think about it. It is your body's master metabolic switch. It is the enzyme that tells cells to stop storing energy and start burning it. When AMPK is activated, it suppresses hepatic glucose production, the liver's tendency to release stored glucose back into your bloodstream throughout the night. It also enhances glucose uptake in peripheral tissues and improves the sensitivity of insulin receptors. A landmark study published in Diabetes Care by Johnston and colleagues tested the effect of vinegar consumed at bedtime in patients with type 2 diabetes. They found that fasting blood glucose levels the following morning were reduced by an average of 4 to 6% compared to placebo, a clinically meaningful reduction, from a single bedtime dose of vinegar in water. The research team attributed this specifically to the suppression of hepatic glucose production through the acetate AMPK mechanism. What that means in practical terms is this. Instead of your liver quietly releasing glucose into your bloodstream for hours while you sleep, elevating your fasting blood sugar, and forcing your body to produce insulin even in the middle of the night, the acetic acid partially closes that gate. You wake up with lower blood glucose, lower morning insulin, and a metabolic starting position that is genuinely better for the rest of the day. Here's the analogy I want you to hold on to. Think of it less as flushing sugar out and more as closing a gate that would otherwise stand open all night, letting glucose circulate when your body has absolutely no constructive use for it. And if you want a sense of scale, the AMPK pathway is actually one of the mechanisms that metformin is believed to work through in part. Metformin, the medication that millions of seniors take every single day and pay for every single month. The acetic acid in apple cider vinegar activates a related pathway for pennies a night. The second ingredient is Ceylon cinnamon, and I need to stop here and be very specific because the distinction between types of cinnamon is not a minor detail. It is a real safety consideration that most videos on this topic skip entirely. There are two main varieties of cinnamon sold commercially. The first is cassia cinnamon, the kind you almost certainly have in your spice cabinet right now, the kind in the little red tin at every grocery store. Cassia contains high concentrations of a compound called coumarin. Coumarin is hepatotoxic. It causes liver damage at regular doses. This is not theoretical. The European Food Safety Authority has established tolerable daily intake limits for coumarin precisely because of this documented risk. Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes called true cinnamon, contains only trace amounts of coumarin, low enough to be considered safe for daily use. It's usually slightly lighter in color, has a more delicate, almost sweet flavor, and is available at most health food stores or online. If you are going to add cinnamon to a nightly drink, Ceylon is the only version that makes sense. Write that down, Ceylon cinnamon, not cassia. Now, the mechanism. Ceylon cinnamon contains bioactive compounds, primarily cinnamaldehyde and a class of proanthocyanidins that interact with insulin signaling at the receptor level. Here's how insulin is supposed to work. It binds to receptors on the surface of your cells, which activates a cascade of internal signals that tell the cell to import glucose from the bloodstream. In insulin-resistant states, which is where most seniors with stubborn blood sugar live, those receptors have become desensitized. They respond sluggishly. The cascade runs poorly. Glucose accumulates in the blood even when there's adequate insulin present. The problem isn't the amount of insulin, it's that the cells have stopped listening to it. Cinnamaldehyde and the proanthocyanidins in Ceylon cinnamon appear to activate insulin receptor kinase, the enzyme that initiates that internal signaling cascade, independently of insulin binding itself. They essentially amplify the downstream signal even when the receptor is partially desensitized. Think of it this way. Your cell is a house. Insulin is the mailman trying to deliver a package, the package being glucose, the energy your cells need to function. In a healthy person, the doorbell rings, the door opens, package delivered. In insulin resistance, the doorbell is broken. The mailman keeps ringing. Nobody answers. So your body sends more mailmen, more insulin, until your pancreas is exhausted from producing a signal that nobody responds to. What Ceylon Cinnamon does is fix the doorbell. It doesn't send more mailmen. It repairs the receiver so that the mailman already knocking can finally get in. A review published in the Annals of Family Medicine analyzed a series of controlled trials and found that cinnamon supplementation produced meaningful reductions in fasting blood glucose and triglycerides across multiple studies. A later analysis in the Journal of Medicinal Food found that this effect was most pronounced in individuals with prediabetes or early insulin resistance, precisely the population where overnight glucose dysregulation is doing the most cumulative damage. So now you have two mechanisms working simultaneously. The apple cider vinegar is suppressing the liver's overnight glucose output through AMPK activation. The Ceylon Cinnamon is improving the ability of cells to respond to whatever insulin is circulating. One is closing the gate, the other is fixing the receiver. Two-angle intervention on the same problem from two entirely different directions. But there's a third mechanism at work here, and it's one that most videos about this drink never mention. It's also the one that explains why consistent, nightly use produces results that a single dose never could. Both apple cider vinegar and Ceylon cinnamon appear to influence the composition and activity of your gut microbiome, and that matters enormously for what happens to your blood sugar overnight. Here's what most people don't realize. Your gut bacteria don't sleep. While you're resting, the bacterial populations in your colon are actively working, producing compounds that enter your bloodstream and directly influence your metabolic function. Specifically, certain beneficial bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate and propionate, that have direct, measurable effects on glucose regulation. Butyrate is the fuel source for the cells lining your colon, but it also enters systemic circulation and activates receptors, GPR41 and GPR43, that stimulate incretin hormone release and enhance insulin sensitivity throughout your body. In plain terms, the right gut bacteria produce compounds overnight that help your body manage blood sugar better while you sleep. Now here's where the drink connects to this. Acetic acid, which is essentially what apple cider vinegar is itself a short-chain fatty acid. Research published in Cell Host and Microbe demonstrated that acetate, whether consumed directly or produced by bacteria, influences the relative abundance of beneficial bacterial populations in your gut. Specifically, it reduces the growth of certain pathogenic species while supporting a bacterium called Akkermansia muciniphila, a species that has been consistently associated with better metabolic health and improved glucose tolerance across multiple human studies. Ceylon cinnamon polyphenols, in separate research, have been shown to increase microbial diversity and favor the very butyrate-producing species that improve overnight insulin sensitivity. What this means practically is something important. This drink does not only work acutely on the night you take it. Regular use appears to gradually shift your gut environment in a direction that makes overnight glucose regulation progressively easier over time. You are not just managing a symptom each night. You are slowly changing the biological foundation that determines how well your body handles glucose across every single overnight fast. That is the difference between a painkiller and a rehabilitation program. And it's the reason Margaret's results kept improving week after week, long past the first night she tried the drink. Now, let's make this practical, because preparation matters, and several common mistakes significantly reduce either the effectiveness or the safety of this drink. Start with warm water, not hot. The temperature matters because hot water above approximately 60 degrees Celsius can degrade some of the enzymatic and probiotic components of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar, particularly the mother, which is the cloudy material that settles at the bottom of the bottle. That mother contains much of the biologically active material. Warm water also makes the drink considerably more tolerable to drink and helps with absorption. A standard mug of warm water is exactly right. Into that water, add 1 to 2 tablespoons of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar, specifically with the mother. That's the cloudy, slightly murky version, not the clear filtered kind. The dose range that appears in clinical research consistently falls between 1 and 2 tablespoons. Do not exceed 2 tablespoons. More does not produce more benefit, and it meaningfully increases the risk of esophageal irritation and dental enamel erosion, both which are documented adverse effects of high-dose vinegar consumption. One more thing on the vinegar. Use a straw. The dilution in a full mug of warm water brings the acidity to a safe level for your esophagus and stomach, but keeping it off your teeth is a sensible extra precaution. Add half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon, not cassia. As I mentioned, the coumarin content in cassia makes it inappropriate for daily use. Half a teaspoon falls within the dose ranges used in the research showing glucose benefits, without approaching any threshold of concern for coumarin-free Ceylon. You can add a small squeeze of lemon. This adds vitamin C, supports liver function overnight, and makes the drink noticeably more pleasant. What you do not add is any sweetener. No honey, no sugar, no agave. Adding sugar to a drink designed to help your body clear overnight glucose is mechanistically self-defeating. You would be re-elevating the very thing the drink is meant to help manage. Timing. Take the drink approximately 30 minutes before bed, not immediately before lying down. The studies showing meaningful reductions in fasting morning glucose consistently used a pre-bed consumption window. The positioning of the acetic acid delivery relative to the overnight hepatic glucose production cycle matters. And this is where most people undermine the entire thing without realizing it. Your last food should be 2 to 3 hours before you take the drink. The mechanisms I've described, AMPK activation, hepatic glucose suppression, cinnamon receptor sensitization, all work optimally when blood glucose is already declining and your body is transitioning into its overnight fasting state. If you take the drink 30 minutes after a biscuit or a late-night snack, you are asking two things to happen simultaneously that work directly against each other. The liver is managing fresh glucose from what you just ate, and the drink is trying to suppress the hepatic glucose output that comes later. You cannot do both at once. The rule is simple. Last food 2 to 3 hours before bed. Drink 30 minutes before bed. In that order, every night. 2 final safety notes. If you have been diagnosed with gastroparesis, peptic ulcers, or chronic acid reflux, speak with your physician before adding this regularly. The acidity is safe for most people at this dilution, but it is contraindicated in certain gastrointestinal conditions. And if you are currently on any medication that affects blood glucose, particularly insulin or sulfonylureas like glipizide or glyburide, this drink can have an additive lowering effect on your morning numbers. That is not necessarily a problem, but it means your existing dosing may need reassessment. Please discuss any consistent changes in your fasting glucose with the doctor managing your medication before making adjustments on your own. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because this is exactly where health content on the internet tends to set people up for disappointment. You will not wake up tomorrow morning with dramatically different blood glucose after one drink. That is not how physiological change works, and telling you otherwise would be dishonest. What the research shows is an acute effect, a measurable reduction in fasting morning glucose on the nights you take the drink. But the magnitude of that effect on a single occasion is modest. In Johnston's study, the reduction in fasting glucose represented a shift of roughly 4 to 6% from baseline. If your fasting glucose normally sits at around 130 milligrams per deciliter, you might see it at 122 or 124 the morning after. That is a real, clinically meaningful shift, but it is not something you'll feel viscerally after night one. What accumulates over weeks and months is a different story entirely. The mechanisms I've described, improved insulin receptor sensitivity, hepatic glucose suppression, and gradual shifts in gut microbiome composition are cumulative processes. Research examining cinnamon supplementation over 12 weeks consistently shows effects substantially larger than single-dose studies. The gut microbiome takes time to shift in response to regular dietary inputs. Insulin receptor sensitivity improves gradually as the signaling environment changes night after night. The honest answer to when will I notice a difference is probably 2 to 4 weeks of consistent use before the downstream effects on energy levels, morning glucose readings, and appetite regulation start to compound in a way that is genuinely perceptible. And from a long-term health standpoint, that timeline is almost irrelevant. The chronic conditions most directly linked to impaired overnight glucose metabolism, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and cardiovascular disease develop over years and decades. A low-cost, low-risk nightly habit that incrementally improves your overnight metabolic environment night after night for years, that is precisely the category of intervention that epidemiological research consistently associates with meaningfully better long-term outcomes. Every night you take this drink, you are making a quiet deposit into your metabolic health account. The balance builds slowly, but it builds. Now, there are two mistakes I see people make that cancel out everything this drink is designed to do, and I want to address both of them directly because they're easy to make and they look innocent. The first is eating refined carbohydrates or anything sugary in the 30 to 60 minutes before taking the drink. I know this sounds obvious, but the most common version of this I see is someone adding this drink to a routine that already includes a late-night snack. A biscuit with evening tea, a small piece of toast, a little dessert, even a glass of juice. The drink cannot meaningfully suppress hepatic glucose production when the liver is already managing a fresh glucose load from something you just ate. The AMPK mechanism and the cinnamon receptor sensitization work optimally when blood glucose is declining and the body is fully transitioning into its overnight fasting state, not when it's simultaneously processing active absorption from your gut. You are asking the mechanism to do two contradictory things at once, and it simply cannot. Last food 2 to 3 hours before bed. Drink 30 minutes before bed. That sequencing is not arbitrary. Honor it. The second mistake is inconsistency. People try the drink for 3 or 4 nights, notice nothing dramatic, and stop. And I understand that impulse, but it is the single biggest reason people don't get results from this. The gut microbiome component of this intervention is particularly dependent on regularity. Sporadic input does not produce the gradual shifts in bacterial population that drive the longer-term insulin sensitivity improvements. Occasional doses of acetic acid and cinnamon polyphenols do not meaningfully reshape your microbial community. Consistent nightly doses over weeks and months do. Think of it exactly the way you think about exercise. One workout does not make you fit, but a consistent habit repeated over time produces changes that nothing else can replicate. This drink works the same way. The benefits depend on repeated, consistent stimulus, not occasional effort. Now, let me bring this back to Margaret. When she told me what changed for her, beyond the numbers, it wasn't just the lower morning readings. It was the feeling of understanding first time why her blood sugar was doing what it was doing. For 12 years, she'd been handed a pill and told to eat less sugar. Nobody had ever explained to her what her liver was doing at 3 in the morning. Nobody had ever told her that there was a window, a specific, addressable, biological window where her body was quietly working against her every single night. When she understood the mechanism, the drink wasn't a leap of faith. It was a logical response to a real physiological problem. And that is exactly the point I want to leave you with. So the question is simply this: are you going to give your body what it needs during that overnight window? Because every night, that window is open. The only question is whether you use it. If this kind of explanation has been useful to you, the real mechanism, not just the surface answer, please subscribe and leave a like. It helps this channel reach more seniors who deserve this information. And share this video with someone you know who is managing their blood sugar, because what Margaret figured out after 12 years of frustration is available to all of them, starting tonight. This is Dr. Sarah Ellison, and I will see you in the next video.